InnerQuest explores various pathways through which you can connect with the infinite wisdom of the universe and apply it to personal, professional, and spiritual growth. This program, featuring accomplished practitioners, educators, and authors, is provided by Infinity Foundation, an innovative center for holistic studies and research. We invite you to share this journey with us.
Hello, welcome to InnerQuest. My name is Jay Stone, your host for today, and our guest is Sally Peterson. Welcome, Sally.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to tell the audience a little bit about you. Sally is a certified forest therapy guide, award-winning clinical licensed social worker, and educator with over 20 years working with the social and emotional needs of children, families, and seniors. She has a strong history in community outreach and trauma-informed practices and is currently focusing on utilizing the healing power of nature. Well, today we're going to focus on forest bathing. So why don't you tell our audience, what is the practice of forest bathing?
So forest bathing is a practice that started in Japan in the 1980s, and it focuses on slowing down while spending time in nature, and it looks to help people reconnect with nature and to relax and to lower their stress levels.
Okay. And when did you start with forest bathing?
I started actually practicing about 3 years ago. Prior to that, I'd read about forest bathing or forest therapy. The terms are used fairly interchangeably in a professional journal while I was working in a school system, in an urban school system, and they were talking about what was happening in Japan, and I thought, well, that sounds neat, but it was a good 10 years or so before I was actually able to go on a walk myself.
Okay, and what is the evolution of forest bathing? You mentioned it started in Japan, but how has it evolved over time? And
so in the 1980s in Japan, the community was struggling with death from overwork, both suicides and just simply too much work and dying from the stress of that kind of a lifestyle. And so the health department decided to try to find ways to manage this stress that the community was feeling, and worked with the forestry department. The forestry department said, we have this idea, people feel better when they're out in nature, let's give it a try. So in the 1980s, they started having these slow, mindful walks, and we're finding that people were having a response where their cortisol levels were going down, their blood pressure was going down, and their immune system was increasing, and that this was sticking with them for a good month after a 3-hour walk.
Just 3 hours?
3 hours, yes. Very slow. Typically, we do less than a mile in the 3 hours.
Okay. All right. And let's see. So did you mention how you got started?
I talked a little bit about reading it in a journal, but for me, what really motivated me to make it happen was that I was going through a period of great stress myself. I had a child who was very ill, to the point where I had to take a leave of absence from my job in order to manage her health concerns.
You mean your own daughter?
My own child, yes. And so my stress level as caregiver was quite high. And people would say, you really need a vacation, but when you're caring for a sick person, vacation is not really an option. So I saw an advertisement for a forest bathing program and thought, maybe I can do 3 hours. Maybe in a month I can take 3 hours out of my time.
Where was this program at?
Down at the Morton Arboretum, so not terribly far. It was the first program in the area. And I went on my first walk and broke the rules. So you're not technically supposed to have your phone with you, but I was so nervous about my child at home that I had that phone down in my pocket. And I thought for the first half hour, why am I doing this? I can't spend the time doing this. But after about that first half hour, I was able to really drop in and relax, and found that this was a very good way for me to manage my own stress levels.
Okay. And so how soon, and did you go back a number of times before you became certified?
So I was attending walks as a participant for almost a year. And then the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy Guides, which is based out of Sonoma, California, came to town to the Morton Arboretum to do a training. And again, I thought, do I really have time to put all this work and effort into becoming a trained guide? But I really did find that it had so much meaning to me that I thought just for myself, it would be important. So I was able to do the training at that time.
And when you were doing your forest bathing in that first year, how many people would go on the forest bathing?
So for the ones that I was leading or the ones that I was attending?
The ones you were attending.
I would say typically they would be drawing 10 to 20 people at a walk.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And would you see the same people each time, or?
Yes, you would see a number of us were repeaters, and you would see the same people, and so there's a few others that also did the training with me or in my cohort that I met there. But then also being the Morton Arboretum, they were drawing from all over the area, and outside of the area, people that were coming to do something that was unique and different.
Would you consider that group therapy?
There are definitely group aspects, and as you're on the walk, quite a bit of it is on your own. But then there are times where we're in a council or a circle where we are sharing with each other if you choose to share.
Mm-hmm.
So there is an aspect that would be absolutely a group therapy aspect.
And would people, when they share, would they talk about the changes in their own being? The problems in their life, or what they observed in nature?
Yes, all of those things.
Okay.
Typically, on a walk, there is a series of invitations, and we talk about invitations very purposefully because we're inviting you to join us in these experiences. So it's a choice. So as we go through, some of them are set and part of a standard sequence, so you'll see those on every walk. And then in between those set ones, there are ones that the guide will present that are unique or different. After each of those invitations, there's time to be in a council and to share if people choose to. So sometimes they're reflecting on what their experience was just moments ago. Sometimes they may be experiencing something that is a reminder of something that happened in their past, or a concern, or even a delight they may have being in nature. But it's a time for people to express themselves in any way and simply be heard.
Yeah, have you ever heard of David Bohm?
I have, yes,
Yeah.
But I don't know his
He
work
was
well.
Albert Einstein's protege, and so he said it takes nature to free up our own nature.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And he also said when people spend time in nature, they experience a physical, mental, and emotional healing effect.
And we are now at a point where that's being proven. So particularly in Japan, but even more locally, there are universities that are studying this, and they are sending groups out both in natural areas and in urban areas, and then measuring the physiological response. And it's absolutely true. And whether you believe it because you feel it yourself and you know it in your own personal self, or whether you want that data, there's both out there.
Well, I've been meditating for 37 years. I haven't missed a day, most days twice, and I often play nature sounds in the background. Does forest bathing recommend when you're not taking a forest bath to listen to nature sounds or look at nature photos, etc.?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a lot of the research is showing that particularly people who are recovering in the hospital, they recover faster if they have access to a window, if they have a plant. Even essential oils, particularly the cedar oils, are very good for healing and relaxation. And one study just looked at just the use of the cedar oils, and they put them in hotel rooms and found that the people that were in the hotel rooms with those scents as well were showing greater relaxation.
And,
so any bit we can put together.
I haven't heard, I've heard of other essential oils, but I haven't heard of cedar oils. Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate on that more?
So one of the things that they study is what is happening to us when we're out in nature. And we seem to have a physiological response to the phytoncides and the essential oils, the volatile essential oils in the trees that the trees give off. So if you think about what a Christmas tree might smell like, or you are smelling some of those scents, when we smell those, our cortisol levels start to go down. Because we have evolved with nature. We have a very physical response to it.
Do you think it's like when people smell each other's pheromones? It's exciting, like the brain's pleasure center, which releases endorphins?
So those phytoncides do have that sort of reaction. Actually, the trees react to each other's as well, and they've been able to track that too.
I believe
it's a communication strategy. So although they might be communicating with each other, hey, there's an insect coming along, or be aware that there's someone who's coming and munching on our leaves. Our reaction is one of connection.
Yeah, I actually saw a documentary on how plants talk. And
it's fascinating.
Yeah, and plants that are related, like brother and sister or sister, they don't fight as much for the light and the water and the soil as much. So, yeah.
And one of the invitations that I sometimes do when I have family groups is to look at the families in the forest. So we're looking at the more than human world, and where are those families working together, and where do you see one individual that's maybe struggling for that light, and another individual that maybe is getting some protection, maybe growing a little more slowly because they're near the family, but really growing in a more strong and direct way as well.
And speaking of family, do you, when people go on the forest baths, do you recommend that they go as a couple, go as a family?
I have seen, actually, just even this past weekend, some really wonderful connectedness between families on forest bathing walks. We had one this weekend where a couple came, and we had them just going through their various senses, and part of that was, with your eyes closed, to turn to a place that felt it was drawing you. And this couple, actually, they turned towards each other without even knowing it. And when they realized it, and it was very touching that they went towards each other as opposed to towards the sun or anything else. I also had a family group that came out with me where we really ended up talking about the family dynamics and how we could see some of that paralleled in what we were seeing around us.
Now, you mentioned your daughter earlier. Has she gone on
Yes.
nature?
Yes. So she's struggled with an autoimmune disease, and we found that when she was outside, particularly spending 6 weeks at a time in Michigan in the forest, that her symptoms improved quite a bit. So I don't have hard, fast data on her per se, other than having observed it, that her immune system definitely improves when she's out in nature, and she loves it.
And so does she request time in nature?
Absolutely. That's where she wants to spend her adult life. So she's currently studying environmental studies.
That is an awesome story, turning your weakest into your strongest. Good. And so talk a little bit about the training that you went through.
So I trained with the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy Guides. It's run by a gentleman named Amos Clifford, who also has books on the topic, and you can definitely find YouTube videos of him. And so we did spend intensive time in the classroom initially down at the Morton Arboretum, being on forest therapy walks, leading the community walks as well. And then we had 9 months where we were studying on our own and having a practicum where we were presenting walks. I also had to do my first aid, but it was the outdoors first aid.
Sure.
I did that.
I've got an outdoor first aid kit.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
And then also having to learn some of the naturalist work, so that the final invitation is always tea, and it's a bioregion tea that would traditionally be foraged along the way. So being able to identify the plants that make a nice tea that is good to be drinking at the end of the walk was part of the training as well.
And has your background in education and social work been a boon to learning this type of forest therapy?
I do believe it has, in that you can train to be a forest therapy guide without that background, and we talk about the forest being the therapist when you're out there and really working to do the healing with you. But I've had situations where I've worked with individuals who maybe have some struggles with trauma or have had some other concerns that have come up, because it can be quite emotional. We tend to try to lean into the pleasurable experiences that people are having, but other emotions can come up, and being able to be comfortable with that and to be able to really be present with strong emotions, I think has been helpful.
I'm sure you've encountered that many times in your clinical practice. You're watching InnerQuest talk show, sponsored by Infinity Foundation. At the end of the show, you'll see, at the credits, you'll see how to find the Infinity Foundation. Our guest today is Sally Peterson, and Sally's talking about forest bathing and forest therapy. And so, so how long ago did you get certified in forest therapy?
About a year and a half ago.
And how often do you try to go out and or you host a group?
1 to 2 times a month typically, and then sometimes I'm asked to do specific groups as well. So I have one coming up that is a Veterans Affairs program.
Awesome.
So that would be not my typical schedule, so I do some of those as well.
And what about like businesses and schools and what other types of organizations?
Yes, I've had businesses come out, and definitely families have come out specifically for their individual family. And as far as schools, I personally haven't done as many with schools, other than I've worked with some local colleges, but as far as younger children, not as much. There is a guide in the western suburbs who works a lot with children. I have found typically that children are very comfortable with nature, and one of the things that why you would go with a guide is if you are feeling a little bit nervous about being in nature, and if you maybe wanted some of these invitations or suggestions until you get more comfortable. So children often are able to do that without a guide.
And then when you host a forest bathing, are you going to like the same places? Do you have to notify like the forest preserves or anything?
So the different land managers have different requirements, and so I've worked to get to know the different land managers and to work with them, and it will depend a lot on if it requires a permit. Definitely things that have a profit aspect will have a different permit need than if it's just a couple of people going on their own.
And then how receptive are the forest preserve managers to your groups?
Actually, some of them have been inviting us to present. So, generally speaking, quite positive. As long as we, follow their rules, are respectful, and talk with them ahead of time. When I do a forage tea in the forest preserves around here, I typically will pre-walk the walk, identify the plants that would make for good tea, and then I source them elsewhere, typically through a professional forager, because our forest preserves don't allow for foraging.
David Odd, by any chance?
I know of him. I've never worked with him or had a chance to go on any of his walks, but I would love to, yeah.
Yeah, I interviewed him a few months ago.
Sure.
He's an amazing guy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very interesting process that he has in working with the restaurants.
I think he's getting some land, and he's where people can come and stay and study for a while.
Yeah.
Good. So what else can you tell me about this forest bathing?
Sure. Well, in Japan, it has grown so much that they have government-sponsored trails that are certified for the practice throughout the country, and we're starting to see a little of that activity here in the United States. There is a standard sequence to it, so if your guide is trained as I was trained, you would have a similar experience in that we would start with what's called pleasures of presence, which is going through your senses and how you're feeling out in nature, and getting more connected that way. And then we would move into some of the other sequences to help the individuals slow down and become more connected.
And that first sequence, I would assume it's very important because it starts the foundation.
Exactly.
Typically, how long does it take for people to really feel comfortable in nature?
I think it really depends on the individual.
I would agree.
So some people are somewhat connected already and just think this would be an interesting new way to experience nature. I know that the association that I'm a part of did do some collection of information and found that the majority of people that are going on the walks are people that are maybe not as connected, but really would like to go outside and feel comfortable. So the group experience is really helpful that way. So they were typically finding it was middle-aged women who were a little bit concerned about going outside and being out in nature without the safety of a group.
Okay, yeah. Oh gosh, I lost my train of thought. So you mentioned the sequences. So you got the general, be aware of the senses. Obviously, sense of sight, what you see, the hear, the animals, etc., birds. Sense of feel, and how being in nature kind of changes the way you feel. Mm-hmm. And I know the smell, but what about taste? Do you get the taste in there?
Yes. So when we go through the different senses, we usually have that a little bit later, so that people are already accessing their sense of smell, and then we do have them sip the air to see what they can taste on the air. And
how do you do that, like this?
It's just simply opening your mouth and sipping in.
Okay.
And people will often find that they can taste some grass or dirt or something that's come up on the air. And then, very importantly, at the very end, our last invitation is that foraged tea. So the foraged tea is another way of being able to taste the environment that you were in.
And so what are some of the ingredients of your teas?
It's whatever's living in the bioregion that is appropriate for tea. So here I've brought a few different things. So one of the plants that I brought that's a dried bergamot. So that's in the tea that I brought today. Yeah, and you'll see that there's white pine needles in there.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And clover, which a lot of us just have in our yard. And there's also dried elderberries in there as well.
Oh.
So those would be all.
You'll enjoy that.
Those are all very, very local to this area.
And could people bring pets?
There is actually a guide who recently wrote a book called Forest Bathing with Your Dog. So she has a whole series of invitations that are around going out with your dog. I have yet to have that on any of my walks. But
did you read the book or look at the book?
I have seen some of the information, but I haven't gone through the whole book yet.
And you call it invitation. Why do you call it an invitation?
This is supposed to be the experience for the individual. So I'm not acting as a teacher. I'm not saying this is what you need to do. I'm saying if you'd like to join me in this, please do. So I was on one walk with a woman who had a very stressful job, and her decision was to lie down for 2 of the 3 hours on a bench. And that was her experience, and that's what she needed. So the invitations are not meant to make people do things, but simply to open up an option for individuals if they so choose.
Okay. And so when the group meets, where do you just meet at, like the trailhead or something?
Typically, it would depend on where we are, what location we're at. But typically there's a trailhead or a building of some sort, and then we'll go from there.
And then do you have like a little orientation speech?
Yes. So we talk a little bit about the history and what was going on in Japan when things were developed. We talk about safety, because even though we have wonderfully managed environments around here, our forest preserves are really, really well taken care of, there is still poison ivy. There are still ticks. And of course, mosquitoes, and you're walking on ground that is not paved typically, so just being aware of where you're putting your feet and that safety comes first.
I know some places they have, it's handicap accessible. Do you ever do handicap forest bathing?
I haven't done anything that has been specific to that, but certainly whenever we're having a walk, we want it to be as accessible as possible. We go very slowly, so that in and of itself is quite helpful for people.
A mile in 3 hours, yeah.
It can be less than a mile. I've been on forest bathing walks that are a quarter of a mile in 3 hours. So it goes very slowly, and it's not a heart rate walk, so we're not pushing ourselves in that way.
Aerobic exercise.
Exactly. So, if that's the challenge, then usually just the nature of the practice takes care of it.
And have you been on forest baths outside of Illinois?
Definitely in other parts of Illinois, and I've led some in farther southern Illinois, but not actually outside of the state.
Yeah, it would be interesting because, of course, the tea would, if it's
would
local.
change.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and do you ever get feedback from participants?
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
what kind of feedback do you usually get?
One that I frequently get is, I thought that I would get bored in 3 hours, but this has been fantastic. People think that 3 hours seems like a really long time, and we do offer. I did an hour and 45 minutes this past Saturday, so it doesn't always. But the standard sequence is the full 3 hours.
And why did you do an hour and 45 minutes instead of the full 3 hours?
Just an option for people, just in case people felt the 3 hours was too much, but wanted to give it a try.
Yeah, let's see. How was the weather Saturday? I don't remember.
It was gorgeous.
Okay.
We did it in the evening and actually ended in the dark.
Oh, I remember. I was outside working in the garden.
So we were very lucky.
Now, you mentioned there's a rule not to have the phone with. And are there any other rules?
Rules, definitely safety. Most things are suggestions as opposed to rules. So typically I say, this is your time, feel free to wander. If the invitation I present doesn't work for you, feel free to take that time to simply notice what you notice. Typically I lead, so I'm going to be in front of the group, but the group isn't expected to walk in a straight line. People do wander and spread out. So it really is about making the experience what you wanted as an individual.
Yeah. What about insect repellent? You recommend that?
Oh, it depends on where you are and what's going on.
It varies season.
Yeah, I typically carry some with me in case people need it.
Yeah, good. Any other things you carry besides insect repellent?
We have done some walks in colder weather, and so I might have the hand warmers for them. There are some invitations where I might utilize some sort of item, whether it's little magnifying glasses or color chips or something like that to help bring up different aspects of nature. So I might do that. I've been on walks where they have mosquito netting that goes over your head if it's a particularly buggy area.
Yeah. Oh, I find mosquito netting doesn't really work too well and isn't comfortable.
No, I'm not a fan myself, but...
Yeah. All right, so let's review. So the physical benefit is decrease in blood pressure, lower heart rate, lower cortisol levels, and the mental and emotional benefits is more of a sense of inner peace, wellness, feeling connected.
Correct. And feeling connected with nature as we have evolved. But one of the other approaches is to have people connect more with each other and to connect in a way where they're being heard and listened to, and having them then hopefully bring back that love or develop that love that they have for nature, because when we love something, then we're willing to defend it.
Good. Well, I think we only have about 30 seconds left, so feel free to...
Could I pour you some tea?
Oh, please.
So at the end, we would typically have a tea. And you see that I have 3 cups instead of 2. Because if we were outside, and I won't do this in your studio, the first cup would go back to the earth as a thank you for hosting us.
Okay. Do you cheers?
We could. There's no rule against it. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
And this
And
is...
it smells delicious. When David Odd was the guest, he just foraged around the building.
It's remarkable.
And he gave me a bunch of stuff to take home, and I cooked it next day, and it was absolutely amazing how well I felt.
It's amazing what you can find just in the vacant lots and schoolyards, and there's quite a bit out there.
And I assume that once the walk's over, the effect of being more observant with your senses are heightened.
Absolutely.
Being more aware. Well, you've been watching InnerQuest Talk Show. For more information about Sally Peterson, stay tuned to the credits at the end. Until next time, wish you good health, good fortune, and good spirits. Thank you so much.
For more information about this show, our guest, Infinity Foundation, or any of our other programs, please visit our website, infinityfoundation.org, or call us at 847-831-8828.